bring our focus, our attention to one thing specifically this morning as we study this, which is this, is how the early church and the disciples specifically, Mary, how they came to accept Jesus' resurrection. Because as I hope you can see from the text, it's not as easy as just listing it as a fact about like what happened, you know. We know the resurrection as a kind of a biblical fact. But really, the truth of it is only really relevant when it's not only just known of, but when it's received into the human heart. And when a heart receives that for themselves. And likewise, the power of the resurrection is only available to those who receive the truth of it in their hearts. Imagine again a Thomas-like scene for every believer on earth. There's something, not again of their own hands in there, but of something of them touching and sensing and knowing the power of the resurrected Christ. And this is what all believers have to hold on to and are grounded by in understanding this concept. Because I have to remind you that even the disciples here who knew him the best were walking with him for years. They weren't expecting a resurrection despite all the things that Jesus had told them before. And as they followed Jesus, I don't know if you remember this from previous scriptures, but they were confused when Jesus would mention this along the way. And it wasn't their focus of thinking even this day of approaching the tomb, as you can tell from their first words uttered. They were not thinking or expecting a resurrection. It just wasn't on their radar. And I looked through a variety of Jesus' predictions. When every once in a while, he would kind of say, and on the third day the Son of Man will rise from the grave, or after he's been crucified, he will rise again. He said this over and over again in the scriptures, in Mark 8:31, 10:34, Luke 18:33, Matthew 16:21. I know I'm reading fast, I'm sorry. Matthew 17:9. And even when Peter and John and Mary Magdalene came, the empty tomb, when they saw it, their first thought was not, hey, resurrection, cool. It wasn't that at all. They thought somebody took the body. We had somebody take the sign out in front of the church. I'm not thinking the sign was resurrected, right? I'm thinking somebody took the sign, I don't know who. That's what I'm thinking. And they're kind of in that same boat. They're thinking others have stolen him away. Maybe the Romans, maybe the Jews, But they're not thinking, resurrection. That's just not where they are. So what turned them to this truth? In the course of this whole chapter, they go from, I don't know, and I'm sad, to, if you retain the sins of any, they are retained. All that that's in a day. Very often when you read biblical accounts, you have to be very careful because of the sense of time in the Bible is very, very different from one book of the Bible to another. And some places like the book of Acts is actually over a course of 20, 30 years of ministry. So it can be very easy to be like, wow, this happened. It was kind of like rapid fire Christianity. But this was a single day in which these things, this kind of revelation happened for these men. This was definitely dynamic. But they only received that knowledge, that understanding, when the resurrected voice spoke to them. Only when Thomas, and even his friends, right, they were witnessing to him. And I can imagine maybe the 7 days between when they told him and when Jesus showed up. Imagine the kind of ribbing he probably got from his friends. Oh yeah, but Thomas doesn't think he did. He's like, hey guys, let me alone, But Thomas also wasn't convinced by even his friend's words. Think about your closest friend or family member that you trust to the bone, and yet not receiving their witness. And there you go. That's welcome. That's human beings. You have to kind of know on your own. You have to be spoken to who you are. And Jesus did that then for Thomas, needing to know for himself. And as soon as he saw and heard and touched, he changed his tune. And you know what? It's the same for us today. There are many people shouting and arguing about the truth and the proof of the resurrection. In fact, I was reading a book in preparation this week that was, just chapter upon chapter, and article upon article about the proofs of the resurrection and historical things and what biblical sources said and what non-biblical sources say and what the arguments are. That Christ swooned, that he wasn't really dead, or this, and then the proof of no, that's not really possible, and all these kinds of, and it was fascinating, it was great. But I also got to the end of that study and I kind of said to myself, why do I believe in the resurrection? I mean, these things, they help me to stay there, but why do I believe in the resurrection? Jeff, why do I believe in the resurrection? 16 years ago I didn't. Why do I believe in the resurrection now? It's because I've seen God's power in my life. I've seen the transfer from his resurrection, what he spoke about it, and I've seen it bear much fruit in my life. That's why I believe in the resurrection. And then these other things are just helping to shore up the foundations of this great biblical truth. But you see, it's not going to move the ball in our culture if we're just arguing about this truth. People have to have an experience of understanding it for themselves. And that's why John concludes the chapter here. If you can think of him writing this out and saying this, and at the end he's just almost like he's pleading with the reader, right? In verse 30. And truly Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. Resurrected life for you in his name.